But we have with us today Bridgette Coleman from the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. Her work focuses on growth and diversification of the Anchorage economy, including business attraction, retention, and expansion. Bridgette recently worked to bring together a group of food-based businesses, state and local government representatives, and food industry support services to identify opportunities to develop a food hub in Anchorage. And today she'll be discussing different food hub models and how they could benefit the local economies here in Alaska. This presentation is being brought to you by the Extension Service, as well as the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation and Western Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. I'm going to keep everybody muted during the presentation. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat box, and Bridgette will either answer them as she goes or save them for the end to be answered. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Bridgette. Oh, I did want to say one other thing. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted online after the event. And I'll send out a link to the Sustainable Agriculture listserv with that address when it's posted. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bridgette. Thank you, Bridgette.
All right, thanks, Darcy. It's just going to take 1 second. We'll get into my presentation here. So like Darcy said, I work for the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, and part of my work is working with a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs. After a number of discussions last summer and into the fall of 2015, I found that a lot of people were operating or starting up food-related businesses and really in need of a space to kind of develop food-related businesses and then also get access to some of Alaska's resources and agriculture that we're growing here. Alaska does have a $5 billion food industry. $2 billion of that is exported as seafood out of the state, some of that out of the country. And of course, the other $3 billion is partially grown here in Anchorage. It's about 11.8 million is food from local farmers for human consumption. But about 95% of the food that we have here is imported from out of state, and that's something that causes a big food security issue for Alaska and something that we feel is a good area of development for the food economy and potentially keeping more of those dollars in Alaska and in our economy here locally. A little bit about AEDC. We have, I guess, a few different initiatives. Like Darcy said, I work on business development, business attraction, and kind of a broad spectrum of that. We also have a Live, Work, Play initiative, which is more of a community development initiative, but also looking at how we can implement health and well-being in Anchorage. And of course, that's important statewide as well, but that kind of plays into this food hub piece as well. And then on the food-related business, we're looking at scalability, and part of that is access to produce. So all of these things kind of played into what drove our interest in looking at a food hub for Anchorage. And bear with me if the slide transitions are a little bit slow for you. Today we're going to look at what a food hub is, where the food is actually coming from, operational characteristics of a food hub. We'll take a look at the Fairbanks market study, which was conducted in 2014, and talk a little bit about opportunities for a food hub here in Anchorage and what that looks like. So a food hub, of course, is a place where food can be aggregated, brought together. It can be a brick and mortar location. It could be a web-based tool. And all of these are in place to kind of streamline the producer-buyer connections and help reduce waste. Food hubs are becoming increasingly popular across the country. They're popping up all from East Coast to West Coast. And they look kind of different everywhere they are. Some of them have processing facilities. Some incorporate a commercial kitchen. A few of them have food incubators for entrepreneurs, again, who are doing that food technology. or food-related business, and then a lot of them have a component of increasing food safety and doing food safety certification as well. So if we're looking at food hubs, a big piece of what they're doing and what applies specifically to farming and produce is aggregating the crops for the growers. Oftentimes, food hubs are bringing together a bunch of smaller farms and providing that central point to gather products and consolidate orders, allowing local buyers to access local or organic produce. Usually, in the past, it had taken a number of different pickups, stopping by multiple farms in order to get the product you need. This brings it all together in one location and simplifies that. They also provide improved marketing, because food hubs offer consolidation and also often do delivery of products. They find that they can fairly easily build a clientele of institutions or private buyers that are a little bit larger scale. They develop scale efficiency. Again, the consolidation is a very key component to this. They play a role in bringing together greater returns for farmers on the dollar, and then individual farms, of course, that couldn't meet the needs of larger institutions on their own are now able to be supplemented with other farms and meet that demand for larger scale buyers. On the distribution piece of this as well, food hubs provide trucking services occasionally. They also sort and combine produce. So you're dropping off all of your produce. They actually break that down for the individual buyers, and then that really just allows farmers to focus on farming and production. So food hubs, I guess, are really key across the country for small to mid-sized producers. They see that there's been an increased demand from buyers and mainstream retailers to purchase things that are locally grown, but there is difficulty in scaling up those products in order to get a benefit at the wholesale price. So food hubs can really help with that. They also create broader marketing opportunities for local producers and help them set them apart from things that are being shipped up from out of state. Here in Alaska, that's kind of key. I think people want to know what that story is behind their food. They want to know what farm it's coming from. They want to know that they're getting that local product, and Food Hub can help provide that marketing aspect for them as well. So what is local food? This has been kind of argued by different people. There isn't really one true specific meaning to local or standardized definition, I guess. A lot of people do consider it that 275 miles or within the state that it's produced. And I think that's one thing for Alaska. We are a huge state, but we do consider ourselves one unit in a lot of ways, and just Alaska grown or Alaska seafood is a big brand, and it's a very popular way to do things. So I would think that moving forward, that's what we would look at for food hubs as well, when we're looking for that local product. So where is the food coming from? This is pretty interesting. The 79 hubs that were looked at by the Michigan State University study had 6,255 suppliers. Most of them were smaller farms and smaller suppliers. The average number of suppliers was 115 per hub, so that's a pretty big, diverse group that's supplying these food hubs. And most of them are getting that food from within 200 to 300 miles of where they're located, so that it's as fresh as possible. So 91% farms and ranches not owned by a food hub, 60% processors that are not owned by a food hub, 32% are getting them from other distributors. Here in Anchorage, we have like D. Tomaso's or Cisco that are moving a lot of that food within the state. And then some food hubs actually own their own farms or ranches and are sourcing from those. And then 15% are non-food related businesses, so some other value-added products that they might have. I do think it's interesting to note that the most utilized source is independent farmers and ranchers. We have a lot of that, especially in the small to medium-sized farms here in Anchorage, or outside of Anchorage. Okay, so looking specifically at those small to mid-sized farms, 55% of the food hubs are getting product, at least some of their product, most of their product from small to mid-sized farms. 37% are getting all of their product from small to mid-sized farms. That is fantastic news. We don't have a ton of huge farms here in Anchorage, so it's nice to see that the majority of them are getting them from these small places that can really provide that story of the farm and the produce and where it's coming from with that. So let's talk a little bit about how they operate. 52% of food hubs are some kind of a mix or a hybrid of farm to consumer and farm to business or institutions. One interesting thing in Alaska is 1 out of every $5 that farmers within Alaska are making is a direct farm to consumer sale. The other $4 are going from farm to business or farm to institution. So we have a little bit of that going on, but we're right about the same with 20% being direct to consumers. Let's see. So legal structure, nonprofits are very popular, for-profits are very popular, and then you see the cooperatives are making up about 1/5 of that as well. Specifically, Anchorage and what we're trying to do for a food hub here, we're looking at possibly a for-profit model. We think we have an opportunity to work in some of that food incubator business concept into there, as well as potentially cool or cold storage for product as well that might work in a for-profit model for Anchorage. But there are a lot in Fairbanks. There's a cooperative. Kenai just launched a nonprofit food hub as well. So different models work for different areas. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, who's going to manage the facility, and what you want to see come out of it going forward. So most food hubs are fairly young. Over 60% are under 6 years old. So it's a new concept nationally, and it's something that's definitely brand new to Alaska. We do have a couple that have popped up recently. Last year got some USDA funding for a couple groups to get their food hubs up and running, but it's something that we're seeing grow here and hopefully will potentially benefit not only the farmers, but the communities that are consuming the goods, and then get some education to people on what they're eating and where it's coming from. So if you're looking at the different products that are carried by food hubs, the majority of them are carrying fresh produce and herbs, and then you see the percentages kind of decrease. Meat and poultry are big, eggs are big, and then other processed products or value-added products as well. It's interesting to note for Alaska that fish here is 12%, but I think the state has a really good opportunity to capitalize on fish, given our seafood industry, and really get more of that to the local market. There's a few groups that are already working on that and saw that niche in there. One of the other things to note is that the fish component actually had the biggest payoff per unit of product. So there's some room in there for that to be a successful component of any food hub in Alaska. So this is the sales revenue. Again, kind of breakdown of what you're looking at. Fresh produce is the highest, and then you have that fish and poultry that are very high as well. It's a decent return on all of the products. So one of the other interesting components to running food hubs across the nation is that a lot of them will have preferences for food safety certified suppliers, looking at people who have that GAP training and making sure that they're delivering a high quality product. one of the reasons they do this is for that marketing component. So if you know that all of your buyers are meeting certain standards of their product, it's easier to sell that to those larger corporate purchasers or institutional purchasing agencies that want to make sure that they're getting a high quality, a high standard of product, and a food hub can really help with that. Many of the food hubs also offer services for producers and suppliers, so assisting them with developing food safety plans, incentivizing them to actually move forward on food safety, maybe get certified. Some of them actually provide staff people that are there to do training and compliance, and then also assisting with good agricultural practices, again, the GAP training. And that really does help them market it, so it's a big invest in that moving the food hub forward. So this is looking at social mission components. Again, this isn't just about aggregating food. It's a huge component of a food hub, but they're looking at, what do we really want to get and give back to? Good practices, safe practices, increasing access to markets for small to mid-sized farmers, increasing minority producer suppliers' access to the markets, addressing disparities through access to healthy food. A lot of food hubs do food training and wellness training for their communities. They like to incorporate a piece of that as well. So it benefits the farmer, but it's also benefiting the community that the food hub is located in, whether it's growing new food businesses, whether it's improving health of the people living there. So some of the operational characteristics, a lot of them do donate back to local food pantries. One of the problems we have here in Anchorage, especially with our food bank, is they do get fresh produce, but for the most part, it is so far gone and deteriorated that it has maybe a day that they can move it to the actual consumer. Having local product that lasts longer, has a longer shelf life, they're able to get more back to the food hubs and benefit those individuals who need food at a more reasonable price for consumption. It's helping to increase the health and access to produce for the community overall. A lot of them do educational, whether it's cooking classes or educating them about food system issues. One of the problems we have as a state is the connectivity. It's really hard to transport things throughout Alaska. Some places are, there's no roads, and it's only accessed by plane or boat. So we have those issues to deal with. If we can raise awareness of that statewide, it can help us to move policy forward that'll make it easier to have access to healthy, fresh food across the state. So three of the biggest barriers to growth that they saw were, of course, securing more product supply, and I think that is something that's challenging for Alaska. In my meetings, we have talked with farmers, and we've talked with buyers, and we've talked with restaurant owners who want access to locally grown, locally produced food. And it seems to be what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we grow more produce and hope that the demand is going to be there, or do we start purchasing more produce and worry that we're not going to get the amount of product that we need to serve our buyers? So there's a little bit of back and forth there, but hopefully we can find a balance that's going to work for both sides. Again, securing capital, that's something that's tricky in Alaska. There's a number of different entities statewide that are trying to improve access to capital for food-related businesses or businesses in general, but we're definitely behind the curve as far as the national, if you're looking at a national supply. So Alaska is moving in the right direction on that. And then again, with the transportation, increasing trucking capacity and delivery is something that is a challenge. So next we're going to take a look at the 2014 market study. This was conducted in Fairbanks, looking at demand for local produce in interior Alaska, and there's some really interesting information that came out of this study. So they did 40 one-on-one interviews. They had a pretty good group that they polled institutions, restaurants, individual buyers, and looked at what that supply and demand relationship looks like. So the majority of the buyer types were purchasing from local farms, and then the other big piece is the food service distributor. Of course, with 95% of our consumables coming in from out of state, it's not surprising to see that there's a number of people who are using those food services and getting food that's coming from out of state. One of the big purchasers, restaurants, they do a lot from local farms. We see that in Anchorage as well. A lot of the ones that we talk to will list the locally purchased products. They'll have the story behind it, the staff's aware of it, it's called out on their menus, and it tends to be a pretty popular attraction for people who are dining at their facilities. So how much are buyers willing to pay for local produce? This is pretty fascinating. Over 50% of buyers said they'd be willing to spend an additional 10 to 25% for locally grown produce. That's pretty huge. And then the 36% that said they'd pay 20% or more, that is still over a fifth more than what they were looking at. So these numbers, when they came back, I think we were all a little surprised at how high they were. And I think that's one thing that I've heard, at least from the farmers I've spoken to. They don't think that they will get the prices they need on wholesale produce to meet their growing demands, and that will be worth it for them to expand their farms. So seeing that information came back is definitely promising. So people who are buying locally and people that aren't buying locally, what are the biggest challenges that they're facing? There's a whole bunch of them. A food hub system can definitely help alleviate some of these challenges, including produce washing and packaging, delivery, limited volume, again, that aggregation of crops from smaller farms. It can help with the lack of convenience and inconsistent ordering and availability. A big piece is on-time delivery and making sure that you have all of the components in place for the buyer. Food hubs are definitely there to do that, to make sure that what they're promising people is showing up on time and in the right amount, and also having that high quality that they've set. I think, again, challenging in Alaska, the timing of delivery and figuring out how that transportation system is a big piece of making a food hub work in anyone's community. Kenai is interesting. They are launching their food hub. They actually have drop points, so they do a weekly pickup. But if you're doing more than once a week, or if you're having people pick up at your food hub location, if you have a brick and mortar location, that can be a challenge that you definitely need to look into and see, how can we make this work most efficiently? Is it going to be pickup days? Are we going to work out having a truck that can deliver, just depending on what volumes you're doing and who your buyers are? So we're going to take a look here at what the buyers in Fairbanks were willing to pay for produce that was sourced locally. These are the top produced vegetables out of Fairbanks. I did think it was interesting looking at these numbers that the average buyer price for locally grown was above the producer's survey price. So every single one was either equal to or higher than what the producers needed to make a profit off of the product. So we know that there's a margin there for them to maybe make even more off of what they're producing than what they think is available to them. So that's something that I think if you're running a food hub, you really need to keep in mind, getting a good deal for the producers that you're working with, and really working those relationships with the buyers in a way that's going to best support the farms and support growth of farming in your region. So the role of food hubs, especially for local food marketing, it can be challenging for local producers to actually access markets. There's often pop-up weekend food festivals or farmers markets, and there's a lot of that direct-to-consumer sales, but if you have a food hub in place, it can help provide access not only more than once a week, but also for a longer period of the growing season. It can be challenging, especially in Alaska, when our growing season is so short and farmers are busy, to get out and actually do direct-to-consumer sales as well. So having a food hub bridges that gap there for them, and it just eases the marketing work and the business work and really lets the farmer focus on growing. Also, information sharing is really key. Transportation and distribution, which are a challenge for everyone. Commuting in and out of Alaska and around from your farms to your buyers is time consuming and something that I think people would like to do less of when they're trying to just grow produce. Again, season extension, you can look at ways to maybe capitalize on some of those root vegetables that'll grow further into the fall and take advantage of that and make sure that we're getting those to buyers when there aren't farmers markets happening, but making sure that they're still getting to the market and that you're making money off of what you're growing. Okay, so that is pretty much what I have for Food Hubs today. I'd love to answer any of the questions that you guys have. I guess I can talk for a second about what we're looking at for Anchorage. It may not apply in your particular region, but just to give you a heads up on what we have going on, I've been working with local food producers, buyers, food-related companies for about the last 8 months and looking at what a food hub might look like here in Anchorage. And we're applying for the USDA planning grant, local food planning grant in May. So we're hoping to get funding to do a twofold project. One is creating a business plan for our food hub, which would be an aggregation point for products, and then also include some kind of a food incubator for food-related businesses. And then the other piece is doing a survey looking directly at those food-related businesses and the resources that they need. So that would be happening over the next 9 months or so, and then next spring, if this all goes according to plan, we'll be applying for an implementation grant and looking at actually building a brick and mortar food hub location here in Anchorage. So I don't know if you guys, yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat box. And I'm not sure if anyone online is one of the folks that was going to talk from Kenai. If you are, maybe you could type in the chat box so I know.
Yeah, I don't know if Robbie made it on.
Was there anyone else that had questions? Maybe while people are thinking, I had a question for you, Bridgette. Mm-hmm. You were talking about the different structures, like for-profit, nonprofit, cooperative. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that, there's different benefits and costs to each of those. Could you get into that any more on how you would go about choosing a model for your food hub?
Sure. I think a big piece of that is deciding who's going to run and manage the food hub itself. So with those cooperatives, you're having a bunch of different, usually farmers come together or food-related businesses come together to operate the space. Oftentimes they will fund somebody to manage the facility, but it just kind of depends on how you want to make that work. Kenai is an interesting one. They did a nonprofit model, and I wish Robbie was here to talk with you guys about it, but they got grant funding to hire someone just to manage the web-based tool that they have. So they have an online component. Farmers log in, they say exactly what they have available, and then in real time, buyers purchase, and it reduces the product down until they're sold out of the product. And then they do those drops at certain delivery sites. that is great. They're hoping that, and this is tricky with nonprofit, you're trying to find that happy balance between covering your costs to operate, and right now they have a grant for 2 years, so they're hoping they can get up to a place where it's sustainable and it will still fund the position that they have. Anchorage is looking at a for-profit model. We think it's going to be a little bit more expensive to operate the facility here, especially having a brick and mortar instead of doing a web-based food hub. So that's why we're looking at a for-profit model. And we also have access to cold storage, and we're a big transportation hub for the state with food coming in and out. And there's a squeeze or a pinch on that cold storage space that's available. So if we can provide some of that, it's a fairly easy way to build this into a for-profit model and make it function well, and then cover the operating costs until it grows to a place where it's being utilized to its full potential by local food companies or producers. Let's see.
Thank you. And it looks like.
So how did we decide to go brick and mortar? Darren asked, instead of the virtual or online like Kenai. So in the fall, we actually had the Wallace Center Food Hub group come up here, and they did a workshop, an all-day workshop looking at food hubs, and we broke into groups by community. And the Anchorage group that sat down, as well as the groups that I've been working with in my meetings, based on what we need for food-related businesses, they were really looking at having a commercial kitchen space and having a processing space. A lot of the institutional buyers, the hospitals and the schools here, they need a finished product that's already been processed and it's ready for purchase. So that played a big part in us deciding to do and look at something that's brick and mortar as opposed to doing an online model. I do think that's important too when you're looking at who your consumers are going to be. That is definitely something that we looked at when we were trying to decide what model to go with, and because we do have those institutional buyers, it's a good fit. If you are just looking at individual consumers or restaurants, you can have that transportation component and still do a web-based model and have it work really effectively.
Thanks, Bridgette.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Darren's got another one. Is there protection for the food hub in a for-profit model compared to a cooperative or nonprofit who has a mission related to food security?
I think some of that mission, there's a little overlap in whatever model you happen to go with. I wouldn't say that having a for-profit model is going to take away from having a mission related to food security or high quality food. I think that just for Anchorage, because of the components that we have here, it plays a better role for long-term for us and for making it work up front. But I do think that having that same mission that's looking at food security, food education, and getting a high quality local food into consumers' hands, it's going to be a very similar theme for the for-profit business. And this is not set in stone, so we have a couple of years it could change.
Well, if there's no more questions, I think we can end the webinar. Again, this will be posted online, and the link to the posting will go out on the Sustainable Agriculture listserv. And thank you, everyone who participated, and thank you, Bridgette, for taking your time to put this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone would like a copy of the report or links to the report sent to you that I referenced in this webinar, please feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'll make sure I get those sent over to you as well.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, thank you,
everyone.